This is the AACC Podcast, the podcast of the Asian American Christian Collaborative. I am so thrilled to invite you into a conversation that I'm about to have with someone that many of you will already know. He is a pastor, he is a thought leader, he's an author, and someone that has really blazed a trail for so many others over the decades of ministry and work in your life. And so you don't really need an introduction, but for some people you will. You are the one and only Pastor Dave Gibbons. Dave, thanks so much for being with us. It's great to be together.
No, man, it's great to hang out with you. I'm glad we had a conversation in Trilith, in Georgia. I got to know you better and what you're all about.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know as much about you, maybe they were living under a rock. Can you share a little bit about yourself as we enter into this conversation?
Yeah, I have a blended cultural background, Korean and American culture, and lived in Arizona. And then I went to a Christian school, both in high school and then also undergrad in South Carolina. So deeply embedded in the South. Yeah. And then I went to seminary at Dallas Theological Seminary and got my THM there. And then went into the Korean church scene, totally immersed into it and became an EM guy. And this was in the early formation, immigrant church. And so all the struggles of it, trying to figure out the future. So I was just immersed in that because I was with a pastor who led the movement in America and was trying to create the next thing. And then after that, I decided to start Newsong. And I started Newsong, and then we did multi-sites around the world and did some social impact organizations as well. Eventually, I went into the marketplace. And so I have a foot in marketplace, a foot in the institutional church. And I'm a senior advisor in the marketplace. I'm also an author.
And you just recently wrote a book. It was just released called The Shape of My Eyes.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about it. Like what, you're articulating experiences that you've had growing up. Can you share a little bit without giving the whole book away?
Oh, yeah, man. Well, I wrote it for those who are searching for home. I just feel so many of us are just lost trying to find our place. And when people even talk about race, many times I hear them talk about Asian Americans. They talk about every other person of color, but not Asians. And so we're just not seen, it seems, and we're invisible. And so the book was for those who are trying to find themselves, really about who they are. And then secondarily, like what are some of maybe the hidden stories and traumas even of our parents' background that we have not explored, but often hinder us and anchor us into really living a full life. And so the book is really that exploration of faith, race, and identity.
And I love how you say that, how that we're not seen, because one of the things I'm always telling people is that Asian Americans aren't invisible, we're oftentimes invisibilized. Right? We exist, but we're oftentimes erased in plain sight.
Yes.
And one of the things I love about your book is that you kind of peel the layers off and then give texture to the Asian American Christian experience.
Right.
By sharing a little bit about your story. Can you kind of give us a sense of like what you went through, how you came to the conclusion that you needed to write this book?
Yeah, I think I had this really unique experience where I noticed in my family there's mental health challenges. And I think I was the culprit. Like a lot of the stuff that in my life was not investigated. I just let it stay unspoken about. And then I had a brain scan. And they said I had a PTSD when they looked at my brain activity. And so I started asking myself, what was the traumas that maybe I haven't dealt with? So that's when I started doing a deeper dive into my story and then into stories about my family that I thought I need to figure out, because possibly that's what was causing a lot of my anxiety and stresses and sometimes even depression. And so I thought the writing of my book would be a healthy way for me to come to a place of healing. So that's what it was. And so as I was writing these stories, there's moments I remember I had never really thought about. You know how you'll tell a story from a narrator perspective, but not as like maybe one of the participants describing that moment in time. And in a memoir, you're describing a setting and you're sitting and marinating in an environment for a while. And that really was great for me because it helped me to see things from a different perspective, whether it's my parents and some of their inadequacies, I thought, as well as maybe I had really a childlike perspective of something that was much more complex. And so, yeah, that whole process was a healing process for me.
I mean, that's really powerful because, I mean, one of the things that is both documented and also experienced pretty commonly among Asian American Christians and essentially all racialized minority populations is the sense of like mass dissociation. Like we suppress our experiences, we suppress the pains that we've experienced, mostly in order to just survive, even if you're multiple generations in. And what you're talking about in terms of how, we don't often hear the stories from older generations, our parents, our grandparents, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth to even get them to share anything about it. Leaves us without the necessary information to understand some of the forces that have shaped us.
Oh, yeah.
And so as you dove into some of that and some of your own histories, what did you uncover?
Well, some shocking things to a lot of people and to myself. The biggest one was probably that the man I thought was my father was not necessarily my father. And so that was pretty huge. And I discovered that through DNA testing. So
where you were like, oh, I thought I was 50% Korean, 50% white.
I know. And all my friends go, duh, look at yourself. But I found out that genetics, you can look 100% one way. So I actually believed my parents. But there was a hiddenness in this story. Now, I'm not sure if they knew, my dad even knew. So that's something, again, it's still a question mark for me. But I think there was such a realization that there's so many things like this probably that are disruptive in our lives and continue to cause like these seismic movements and tremors. But we don't have any answer for it. And so that's why I said, man, I got to dig into this. And so I started interviewing people. Then I went to Korea multiple times. And eventually, wonderfully, I didn't write about this in the book, I found my mom's family register, which was like a miracle.
And what did that do when you found it?
Well, it first affirmed, like my mom's background because, I realized she was born in poverty in this family situation. And it confirmed the suspicions of some of the things I was seeing in myself or my children were rooted in this registry of people that was now official. So it just codified everything versus being this abstract. I think it was this way. It just made it very real.
And then what was the impact on your life? Like, how did you process all of that? What were some of the conclusions that you drew? It sounds like it was an aha moment, but what was the aha?
I think it had to do with home. As you're searching, you're wondering, well, who am I? That helped define it. And then it's like, when people talk about reincarnation, for example, they'll many times say, well, yeah, I was a prince or a king. The truth is, that's not my lineage. We were very poor, especially post-war. And then my great-grandfather was an alcoholic, or my grandfather was, and abusive. So these things, again, just unsurface and unearthed in the exploration.
Yeah. So you entered into like a really significant journey once you took the DNA test. I mean, there was a lot of trauma prior to, which if you want to share, you can. But it seems like a big part of that awakening, in addition to a lot of the discrimination and racism you experienced growing up, which we'd love for you to share about, it put you on a different pathway around your Asian American identity or Asian American Christian identity. Can you speak a little into that?
I think what I've learned is a lot of my theology was based upon this picture of God, which was really strong and mighty and powerful, but I don't think I understood the love side of it as much. It was more of a rule boundary set orientation, and things were very dualistic or binary. It's either right or wrong, it's black and white. In fact, I remember asking my pastor, is there any gray in the Bible? He goes, oh no. He said, everything's black and white, man. And for me, like, because my parents were going through a divorce and things were chaotic, the older I got when I was in high school, oh man, I needed someone who had the answers. So I think I gravitated towards it even more. So that there was actually someone who knew the way. But so I didn't really question it until I was confronted with the racism I felt at it, the biggest Christian university in America at the time, when they told me that I couldn't interracially date. And because I said, because why? And they said, because the Bible says so. And they mentioned a couple passages that were like irrelevant, but they were using them as proof text. And so I go, whoa. So you start thinking, how much of my Christianity is based upon like these type of beliefs? So it caused me to be really curious. And it was really beautiful because within this setting, there's always like these influencers that are often hidden, but that God will have them come up at the right time. Like maybe a Mordecai type of individual, they just seem to pop up to help guide you. And I remember this one esteemed professor that I really respected how he thought. He had white hair. It was Charles Smith. He came to me and said, he knew what was going on with the school. He said, Dave, you're on the right path. And then I would have, like, I was in these like hardcore fundamentalist Christian conservative schools. And again, I appreciate so much of my journey, what I learned about God, my faith in these Christian schools. A lot of my great friendships have come from that community. But then I don't know if my thirst for an understanding of God was elevated. It was more like confined to a certain set of rules until that moment. And then from that moment on, I started questioning a lot of things. And while some maybe initially thought of as rebellious or being heretical, I just felt my God was big enough to handle my questions. That he wouldn't see it as like rebellion, but one who was really trying to figure it out. And that's the type of student I felt I was. I wasn't trying to be rebellious. I just want to try to understand what's happening. So I think a lot of my formation of faith was developed from that hardcore fundamentalism. And then what influenced it even more was this idea of like eschatology, the last things. And I had so much stress. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I'd be scared my parents were raptured. I was left alone because literally songs like I Wish We All Been Ready. Have you heard that song?
I'm sure I have. Not off the top of my head.
Oh, see, I hadn't memorized. I was so scared. It said life was filled with guns and wars, and everyone got trampled on the floor. I wish we'd all been ready. Two men walking up a hill, one disappears and one left standing still. I wish we'd all been ready. There's no time to change your mind. The sun has come, and you've been left behind. And so that, as well as like Thief in the Night, this movie, and the book called 666, and then there's all these other Last Times books that became like bestsellers globally. I was just fueled by fear. Yes. And then looking back, I said the whole movement was like based on fear. Fear of the end, fear of hell. And so everything was based upon fear. And I go, the more I started studying God and questioning these things, I go, man, God is like the opposite of this. He's all about love. The opposite of fear is love. And I said, man. So anyways, I started rethinking not only in terms of my Christian identity, but the book also went into the racial side. And then who am I after you even get past the race and then your faith? Is there more?
I mean, that's so true, because I mean, like the Bible tells us that perfect love casts out fear, and yet fear has often been used as a tool to create control. And what's remarkable is how much we as humans crave control and know how to institutionalize it out of our desire to avoid anything that might potentially happen and go awry. And yet that's the exact opposite of what God would have us do in his, you know, peace giving, peace infusing, love saturated, grace abounding disposition. And so that's good. I mean, share some more about like your journey as an Asian American Christian. Then, I mean, you talk about it a lot in your book. In fact, it feels like your Asian American identity was the main thing that kind of blossomed over the last, I don't know, few years.
Well, it's probably been, since I started going to Korean church, which I never put a foot in until I was in grad school. It's because some guy that was a EM pastor, that was more 1.5 generation, he looked at me and goes, "You Korean?" I go, "Yeah, I'm Korean." He goes, "Come on, we got to talk." Yeah. And he looked at me with such sobriety, and he goes, "You need to be involved in Korean church, because the Korean church needs someone like you." And I go, "I don't know, man. I never even stepped foot in a Korean church." He goes, "No, come visit my Korean church." And so I went to it, and I saw like 1,000 kids, and I saw how bored they were. And I had a youth group that was really exciting and fun. And I said, "Oh, dang, that's maybe why I'm alive. I could actually help these kids really connect to God. I understand who they are. And then I also know how to maybe communicate this in a way that they would love it." And so, yeah, so I think my journey really started like that. It was kind of random. This guy just seeing me on the campus and then inviting me. And then the more I got immersed into it, my heart just opened up to this whole generation. And then we started getting stats. Like you mentioned Peter Cha from Trinity. He became a close friend. And then there was a survey that came out that said 97% of post-college graduates were exiting the church. These were ones who had been going to church. They were immigrant parents' churches. And then when we started studying this historically, we saw this with all the different Asian American brackets, and even with immigrants. While their parents had this historic grounding of their faith in the new land, it often wasn't passed on to their children as they became adults. So we saw this as what we call the silent exodus. Yeah. And then a new LA Times article came out on that, a couple of them. They started getting widespread attention. And I felt called to that generation. So yeah, so my life started leaning into that side of things. But as I was in the Korean church, I still felt this need to live out this vision I saw of like what seemed to be this kingdom of all peoples. And then the race riots happened, or the race conflict in LA in '92. And then that just sealed it. And I said, you know what? I think I'm called to focus on reconciliation. And that became the birth of Newsong, where our one-word focused vision statement is really around the idea of reconciliation.
I mean, as you're talking about this, I want to kind of go in like multiple directions, but trying to stay in the lane of kind of the journey you've been on around your book and kind of what you're sharing there. As you think about like, where you are now versus where you had been throughout the different seasons, what do you wish the church did as it pertains to your identity as an Asian American Christian, as a Korean American Christian? What do you wish the church didn't do as you were growing up? What are things that you feel like has been great, and what do you feel like has been lacking?
There's so much, man. Yeah. How much time? We got like 5 hours to do
Let's see.
At least. And we still couldn't cover it all.
Can we do it in 3 minutes?
We talked 4 hours like in Georgia, man, about maybe 2 of those things.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think a lot of it's around like a value system and creating a culture, an environment that's open and that sees God beyond any box. So I think what the church did right for me was grounded me in the scriptures. Like I'll never forsake that. My love for the Bible, my love for the Word of God, that's rooted in me. So I think of the world often through the lens of scripture. It's just a part of who I am. That can also be limiting because that became the only source of revelation. Where I think the limiting side was I didn't see that strong an emphasis on the revelation of God being through dreams and visions uh, through human beings because they're made in the image of God. And I think C.S. Lewis even said that we'll never get closer to God than through another human being. It's a summary, but he essentially said that. I wasn't taught that as a priority. And I think because of that, you can other people a lot too. There's not a respect for other religions or people that are of different thought. Because even within Christianity, my understanding is there's like 30,000 plus denominations or diverse organizations. And so, yeah, I think I would have appreciated a broader perspective, a culture that would help openness. And I think what was limiting too was like an emphasis on diversity and the need for diversity. As I grew in my Christian faith, I don't know if you remember the megachurch era, after Crystal Cathedral, it helped influence Rick Warren and Bill Hybels. And then everything got to become like a very business-like, homogeneous thing, where Saddleback had Saddleback Sam, Willow Creek had Unchurched Harry Mary, which was like a demographic to target. And these were people like you. And for some reason, as soon as I got involved with that, because we were all going to church planning conferences and church growth conferences, it just rubbed me wrong. And the more I dug into it, I go, this is actually exact opposite of who our neighbor is. Our neighbor is not someone like us. It's actually someone who's not like us, And so I said, God would always go after the other. And then in that pursuit, it would demonstrate his authority and also his authenticity and who he really is, that he was a God that didn't favor one above the other, but would actually love the outsider. So I wish the church really broke that down better, because I think because of that, the church became more narcissistic and very individualized and siloed and didn't respect the other. And now we see it today in 21st century, America, who's supposed to welcome the immigrant, we want to just build walls and ignore the immigrant, even if they're fleeing terror in their countries. Whereas when we look at our families, generationally, our families fled that type of terror, trying to find hope in America. So the church has bought into that. So yeah, those are some of the things I think that I would change, is just the culture, the values sets that were so emphasized, that was probably much larger. And then maybe one more thing is, I think, the way we do evangelism. And evangelism was like a sales job. You memorize things, you knock on doors. So basically, it's like multi-level marketing, but also mass marketing. Hopefully, if you send 100 mailers out, you'll get 2%. So it's the same way. Just spread the word, and hopefully you get 2%. Doesn't matter how you say it, or fake it like you love them. Say you love them, but you really don't even know them, nor would you follow up with them. So yeah, I think the way evangelism was done was very salesman-like. It was based on fear and also a lot of hype. It wasn't real. It wasn't really based on you being loved, that more than your spoken word, you exhibiting a listening skill, a demonstration of empathy and understanding would maybe be a better gospel witness. So yeah, this evangelism I thought was too weird, or salesman-like, and it wasn't really love-centered.
And what you're saying actually is consistent with all the research out there, right? They're saying forcing propositional truths down people's throats does not work. True evangelism begins with listening. True discipleship demands that you listen well and listen deeply. And out of that, you learn what the heart needs, what the heart of the person that's sitting across from you needs, so that you can apply the truth of the gospel and present the person of Jesus into their life. And yet that seems to be missing, because we just are so quick to want to get people saved, to check off a list and then move on to the next person so that we can share the gospel with them and do the same thing.
Exactly.
But, like in a lot of what you're sharing, we're moving into like the church conversation.
Yeah.
I want to get to you and like your heart and like your experience.
Right.
And, a part of that is like, I think the most fascinating thing about like your journey is like how you discovered that you were, in some ways like really Korean American, really Asian American more recently. And um, I guess as you've been on this journey, because let me give you an example. There is a friend of mine that I used to work with at a Christian college, and he said he was a naturalized citizen, and he was a green card holder for a long time. And he basically said, you know, I didn't expect to be treated like an American because I saw myself as a foreigner. And it wasn't until I got my citizenship, until I was naturalized, that something clicked within me that I was no longer willing to be treated like a foreigner, but yet it didn't matter to the world around me. Everyone still treated me as if I was some foreigner. And so he would experience the same type of discrimination despite being an American. And so he started kind of powering up a little bit and saying, and becoming a little more bold and saying, you can't talk to me that way. So one of the things I love about your book is that it's almost like it's a summary of your discovering who you are, who God has kind of made you to be. A part of that is what you talked about in terms of the disruption that the DNA testing had on your life and the journey that began afterwards. What has your kind of process been? You know, like throughout your whole life, you experienced racism and you were discriminated against as you were growing up. Maybe you can share a little bit about what that was like. What did that do to you internally? And then once you learned that, you know, you were fully Korean, you know, that you're 100% Asian American, and that, you know, you really did lead one of the largest Asian American churches in the U.S. for a long time. Like, how has your relationship with your Asian American identity evolved over the years?
Initially, I didn't want anything to do with it because when I was asking my dad, I was in conflict with it when I was in fourth grade. He looked at me when I asked him, hey, what am I? Or who am I? And I said, am I Korean or American? Now, American being, you know, white at the time. And he goes, you're American, man. 100%, you're American. So I just took on that identity. But it was in conflict with what I was hearing at the school or in the neighborhood or when I was out in public. When I was called slant eyes or they're making gestures with slant eyes, it just didn't seem like I was American. And so I think early on, I would not try to identify with the Asian side because I was trying to fit in. And that was really the goal. The word that was used at that time was cultural assimilation. Just learn how to assimilate, like the cyborg, you know. And so I think I was just trying to fit in and not cause any ripples. I didn't want any attention. So you just learn to kind of do what others do, talk like how they talk, and you just learn how to adapt. And I think it's a skill set actually that was important for me to cultivate, but maybe not for the right motivation. And so I think my identity was wrapped around being American. And I saw myself as a white American, even though when I looked in the mirror, 100% Asian. It's so crazy, right? Like you can create this illusion of your identity and just ignore literally what you're seeing right in front of your face. It's called inattentional awareness, you know.
And that actually makes sense because I mean, I remember, I bet you every single person that's stepped into your church has wondered, what ethnicity is Dave Gibbons? Especially if they don't know your story.
Yeah.
And then when they hear that you're a mixed race, that you're half white, half Korean, people are like,
Oh, yeah.
that doesn't make any sense, but okay, you
All
just
the
kind of
time.
accept it.
Because science, genetics, they understood the genetics, but still, even my own wife didn't believe it over time. The more she was with Korean people, she goes, Dave's 100% Korean.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and then the whole cultural argument too, you know, is it just what you look like and is it your culture that dominates? So then you get to be more complex and sophisticated with identity when it comes to an academic perspective. But just from a pure physical perspective, you know, I didn't accept the way I looked. I wasn't proud of my eyes. So that's why I call it the shape of my eyes, because people were making fun of it. And
You have beautiful eyes, by the way.
oh, yeah, thank you. My children and wife think the same, so
Yeah.
hopefully, at least that's good. But, I think the shift occurred, I think, as I started to be in community with Korean people and then Asians, and I saw how beautiful they were. Like, even from a dating perspective, I didn't date Asian because, I didn't see it as necessarily beautiful. It was, again, an ignorance, and I think
And a conditioning.
it's a conditioning that I wasn't even aware of until I was older. But, as I was in community and you're just with people, you stare at them and go, wow, they are beautiful. And then you look at their gifts and you look at the culture, you go, these things aren't covered in Western society, like, specifically around suffering or pain and loss. So I started seeing a different side of culture and identity that was tied into the way people look, but is also beyond that. So as I got older and I was immersed in the community, something started to happen in the culture where, the Bruce Lee stuff,
Yeah.
Kung Fu.
Yes.
So we're always known as martial artists, but there was a little bit of pride in that.
Yes.
But dude, we were like badasses, like, in a way. You could be looked as like tough and manly, which was really the opposite of what's out there. So they were like heroic in that endeavor. But then you get stereotyped that we all know martial arts. But I started to prove myself, I think, in sports, and that helped me to develop more confidence to speak out about who I am. But it was primarily in the Asian American context that I started to see the beauty. And as culture evolved and as I grew older.
So where did you find the context? Tell me about the context. Yeah.
It was in the church.
Okay. So the Korean American churches that you were part of.
Yeah, man, the foods that my mom cooked, I saw, man, there's a whole array of food we never ate. And it became much more complex and colorful and beautiful. And then seeing the older generation, the younger generation, it felt like home. Yeah. The smells felt like that way, the people, the jokes, even though the language wasn't understood by me, except the profanities, of course, and the food.
Yeah. Where's the bathroom? And then all the curse words.
All the gross words that you don't want to repeat. But I go, wow, this is like, I love these people. And then my wife, who's white, was loving it too. And they would often say, hey, she's even more Korean than you, man. Which could be, not healthy to say either. But it was just like, she was loving the culture. And then she had such a pride in my culture. And then when I started going to Korea, and this was a big moment, it was probably like after I started Newsong 28 years ago, one of the biggest mega churches in the world, like Korea at that time had 8 out of the 10 biggest mega churches. Mega church there was like 100,000 to 1 million people. Well, one of the biggest in Korea, the pastor, his name was Ha-Young-jo. He invited like the next generation of leaders at that time, the up and coming second gen, to come to Korea. And he went to expose us to all the innovation and things that were happening in Korea. So they paid for everything. And I just got so proud of like, look what they're building here. And Ha-Young-jo, like I'd never even heard of this man, but he was the most visionary leader I had ever met. He was envisioning, CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network. He was working with marketplace leaders. He was involved in entertainment, all the different sectors of marketplace. And then he built a theology center, and he was doing all this social impact work. Dude, I thought these American pastors were crushing it, but this guy was like 10 times. It was a world like Narnia. I didn't know this existed, and that there's like this great of people, and then everybody looks like me. And so then I started like saying, wow, I'm proud of like who I am. But then when you come back to America, you see the conflict like with the LA riot stuff. And then also what we see systemically, and you get discouraged. But over time, I think what has happened is the more I immerse myself in Korean culture, Asian culture, because at Newsong, we had like 15 different Asian groups coming early on. Our churches grew with primarily Asians in that time in our history. 28-year-olds was the average age. And I just fell in love, and I started to appreciate. And then what was cool was in the culture side, like in Korea, is it started growing in popularity because of the cars. Yes. remember the Hyundais at first were horrible. They're junk pieces. But Hyundai started getting cooler, Kia started getting cooler and better cars. And then entertainment-wise, we started getting involved in design, filmmaking, K-drama now is like all over the place. BTS bigger than, Rolling Stones or Beatles. And I'm thinking, man, I'm proud of my heritage, man. But I was so thankful that God made me who I am. I never thought Koreans would actually be liked and people want to be like us.
Yes.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. No, I totally resonate with that. I mean, when I was growing up, it was, oh, are you Chinese or Japanese? And then it was nothing
Right.
else. And then it usually came with that weird, like, racist poem.
Totally.
Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these.
Oh.
And then I was like, no, I'm Korean. Nobody knew what a Korean was. Now
Totally.
everybody knows what a Korean is.
Yeah.
And I think, like, for me, one of the big aha moments was when I went to a BTS concert.
Okay.
I didn't even know who BTS was.
Okay.
Because I'm not following music in general.
Yeah.
I listen to my, CCM music.
Right.
Because that's how I was conditioned by the church. Secular music is bad.
Yeah.
Christian worship is the only thing
Yeah.
that's acceptable.
Yeah.
And then my friend basically said, hey, there's a pretty big K-pop group called BTS that's playing in Soldier Field in Chicago. And so I looked online at StubHub. Tickets were going for $50 because it was going to rain.
Oh.
And so like, all right, let's just go. We got 200 level seats, like right in front. It was
No
great.
way.
And I was like, this is amazing because it was probably the most diverse setting I've ever been in.
Yeah.
People from all religious backgrounds, all racial backgrounds were there. Everyone was singing in Korean.
It's so crazy, right?
And I was like, this is amazing. The thing that everyone didn't even know existed when I was growing up is the thing that they're all trying to become familiar with.
Absolutely.
And so I totally resonate with the whole pride thing. And I was like, yes, learn Korean, all of you. And like for BTS, y'all are starting to sing songs in English.
Right.
I need them to stay singing in Korean.
Totally,
right? Blackpink, BTS, all these songs, all these groups need to keep singing in Korean. So, I mean, you wrote this book. Now, it's released.
Right.
As you reflect on it, what are your hope that people will get out of it? I mean, you talked about like people finding home, which, belonging is like a huge theme within our communities because in many ways we experience exile as Asian Americans, right? And we experience a type of exile that, forces us to fully blend in or assimilate or feel like we can't even be counted among the number. And so that home piece really resonates. But as people are reading through it, what would you say, like, pay attention to this, or this is what I really hope you get out of this?
I'm hoping that the reader and those who are checking this out would find healing as they read the story because they'll discover something that it's their story. And so I've had people come up to me that are reading the book. They said, man, you're giving me words for what I didn't know existed inside of me. And literally people just start weeping. And I have people coming up to me and say, I couldn't put the book down. I just read it in one night. Oh, by the way, I knew my wife, she says she's the common person. And she usually doesn't compliment my stuff at all. But when she read it, she stayed up all night long. And she said, Dave, this is a really good book. I knew it had some type of traction, but I think she knew when she read the book too, because of what I shared, there was healing for me, but then also be healing maybe for our children, healing for others. So my hope is that people find healing in unearthing some of these hidden secrets in our own lives and our family's life as they hear my story of these unearthed secrets and stories. And secondarily, I want them to be inspired, that their unique place in whatever society they're in, with whatever traumas they've gone through or suffering, really helps form a very powerful identity. And it doesn't have to be seen as an anchor or something to hide, but it could be transformed. I understand that there's a law in physics that says loss is transformative. And so loss isn't what we usually think it is, that it's just like total death, but actually it is this being created in another form that could be something better. And we know that even within the Christian faith. And so to me, I want them to see and be inspired that yet whatever losses that you do unearth, whatever suffering and traumas that you've experienced or your families, it doesn't have to be that wound, because out of your deepest wounds can come your greatest calling. And then the third thing I would say is I want them to find power, because often you go, I don't have any more energy to keep battling this out. I don't know where is this energy going to come from? There's a power in our suffering. Through our suffering, we gain authority. We gained experience and ability to engage because we've been there and done that. There's a seasoned sage that evolves from the trials and tribulation that you're going through. So that's my hope, is that people would find healing, inspiration, and then power to make it through whatever they're going through today.
That's good. I mean, for people who are listening in and watching, is there like a word of encouragement as you reflect on your whole life? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, you have many decades to come. But you've blazed trails for
Mm-hmm.
many of us. If there are people in younger generations, what would you want us to walk away with?
If you think too much about the future, you'll tend to worry a lot. If you think too much about the past, you'll live a life of regret. The goal is to be fully present in the now. It's the beautiful now. Super hard because we're distracted. We're distracted by our technologies. We're distracted by the culture of hustle and consumerism. What's hard is to live right now in this moment. And so my encouragement would be, don't only look at what you don't have. Look at what's in your hand right now. You have everything you need to activate a flourishing life.
That's good. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for being with me. This has been amazing and incredible, and I'm looking forward to future conversations together.
Right on, Ray. It's been great hanging out with you.
Well, this has been an episode of the Asian American Christian Collaborative Podcast, or the AACC Podcast. Keep tuning in as we are highlighting voices and amplifying stories of the Asian American Christian community. If you aren't connected with us through social media, make sure you're following us on at AA Christ Collab. Make sure you sign up for our newsletter, and of course, check us out in other ways, especially if we are hosting events in your area. My name is Ray Chang. I had the privilege of serving as the president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative, and look forward to connecting with you next time.